The Jungle Cruise opened with Disneyland on July 17, 1955. At the time, it was Disneyland's marquee attraction, and it was really the main draw for anybody to venture into Adventureland. The idea behind the attraction was that it would echo the locations featured in Disney's nature documentary series, The True Life Adventures. In fact, the area even held the working name of True Life Adventureland during a large portion of Disneyland's pre-production. Aspects of the Jungle River Cruise were heavily inspired by one upcoming installment particularly called The African Lion, and the 1951 John Huston film The African Queen, starring Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn. The production saw Bogart as a grizzled riverboat captain begrudgingly offering safe passage along the dangerous banks of the African riverfront to the upright missionary, played by Katharine Hepburn, incidentally getting involved in World War I in the process. The African Queen balanced the allure of the jungle and exotic animal wildlife with the intrigue, mystery, and certain peril of river exploration. This feeling would be perfect for Adventureland, and the film would be a great influence for Imagineer Harper Goff, who was overseeing the attraction. Like the African Queen and the True Life Adventure series, the original idea for the Jungle Cruise was that it would feature true-life jungle animals. Guests could come to Disneyland and see the real thing right before them on the cruise, just as they would along true, treacherous rivers abroad. But as Imagineering quickly realized, the reality of real animals is that they need to sleep, and they need to eat, and they need to do other things. Many of the animals desired for the adventure were nocturnal animals, and Disneyland had no immediate plans to be open overnight. The truth was that true-life animals were not natural performers and were too unpredictable to build an attraction around. If the Jungle Cruise was going to be this massive showpiece, Imagineers needed to figure out an alternative. The solution was to make the animals themselves. The wildlife on display in the Jungle River Cruise would all be animatronics. The dense jungle foliage allowed each of the machinery to be concealed behind plants or submerged underwater. This ensured that the animal performers were always present, always rested, and always on cue in the most exciting and specific way possible. Walt hired his personal gardener to oversee the greenery and landscape design of the attraction. Imagineer Bill Evans brought in authentic plants from all over the world to set up root in the Jungle Cruise, even planting some of the trees upside down in order to achieve the right exotic look. As the time would pass, the foliage would become fuller and lusher, creating a variety of thick jungle panoramas. Evans completely transformed the former orange grove into a seemingly true-life wilderness environment. While everything was staged, the feeling would certainly be authentic and would mimic the reality featured in Disney's documentaries. Each of those episodes had a deep-voiced, formal narrator to explain the amazing things they were witnessing, and the Jungle Cruise would be no different. The attraction opened with a straight-laced captain who would guide and exhibit in great detail the things unfolding before the guests. The attraction as it was wildly popular. It took the excitement of a months-long river expedition and condensed it down to a 7-minute highlight reel. Walt Disney was proud of his work, and with the leadership of Harper Goff, Bill Evans, and the rest of the Imagineering team, he had a popular attraction as the draw of Adventureland and one of the highlights of the entire park. One day, Walt was routinely touring about Disneyland and was able to casually observe some guests as he lingered around Adventureland. A mother and her child trotted up close to the entrance of the Jungle Cruise, and Walt could overhear their conversation. The child saw that the Jungle Cruise was right there, and he pleaded with his mother to take him on, to which his mother replied, "We've already been on this ride, we don't need to do it again." This rocked Walt's worldview. The crowds were coming, the attendance was regular, and yet there were some guests that were already over it. And so we made a personal pledge that day, a promise that Disneyland would never stay the same. As long as there was imagination left in the world, there would always be new and fresh and updated adventures to be had in Disneyland. Walt, going forward, was always thinking of ways he could improve his park, improve his ride, so the guests would always be clamoring to come back and go around again. This sentiment was ever true in 1964 as some new excursions and tour guides were added to the Jungle River Cruise.
Well, if I had it to do over again, I think, no, I don't think I would. I don't know. I hope I don't have to do it over again.
The year is 1964, and a 3-hour tour goes terribly wrong as the movie starts and the rest get stranded on the first ever episode of Gilligan's Island. Wartime becomes playtime as the Hasbro Toy Company introduces the first line of G.I. Joe action figures, ready to take up arms and go into battle. And the culinary landscape is forever changed as the first ever buffalo wings make their debut at the Anchor Bar in Buffalo, New York. And arguably Walt Disney's greatest cinematic achievement, Mary Poppins, premieres with much fanfare on August 27, 1964. The film starred Julie Andrews as the magical titular nanny Mary Poppins, with Dick Van Dyke and David Tomlinson in memorable supporting roles. Mary Poppins would be a sensational fusion of all of Walt Disney's greatest efforts. There were scenes of fantastic live action fused with engaging animation. Wonderful music and instantly iconic songs written by the Sherman Brothers floated over every scene. Incredible sets garnished each act, and special effects would enhance every magical moment displayed on screen, including one of Walt Disney's latest inventions, the audio animatronic. In one of the film's classic songs, A Spoonful of Sugar, Mary Poppins sings over to a nursery room window and beckons a robin to whistle along with her the fanciful tune of the sequence. The audio animatronic robin was developed at WED Enterprises in tandem with the singing birds now entertaining guests daily in Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room at Disneyland. Mary Poppins was a practically perfect success in every way. It delivered on countless Disney elements. The story itself was adapted from a series of popular children's novels, but when Walt took it under his wing, he added extra splashes of fantasy and whimsy, a well-rounded and colorful cast, and a catalog of songs that would be timeless from the start. Unsurprisingly, audiences responded in droves, and Disneyland was able to reap some of the reward. Mary Poppins was wildly successful and profitable, and with a chunk of the earnings, Walt designated a special parcel of it for an official division of WED Enterprises. The division of Imagineering that was responsible for the audio animatronic Robin and more was expanded and officially moved to its own production facility a few miles away, where it could focus on enhancing and improving these new technological developments. The division was called Mappo. It originally got its name from its cinematic benefactor, that being a shortening of the name Mary Poppins. Mappo would eventually, and perhaps more notably, be recognized within Imagineering under a more appropriate moniker as the Manufacturing and Production Organization. This division would oversee and develop every single audio animatronic that would be featured in Disneyland for a considerable time. Right from its inception, the Mappo division would be in full swing with the additional attractions that Walt Disney was overseeing at the 1964 World's Fair at Flushing Meadows Park in Queens, New York. The attractions being run by Disney were incredibly popular. Walt added a flair to the fair that was quintessential Disneyland entertainment. For the Ford Motor Company, Disney developed an attraction called Ford's Magic Skyways, where guests would board and be transported through time from the prehistoric past to the hopeful and revolutionary future. For General Electric, Disney developed an attraction called Progress Land, featuring an audio animatronic family living through the advancements of technology through the decades, and it was housed in an impressive rotating theater. For the state of Illinois, Disney set up the attraction called Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and it would feature a convincingly lifelike audio animatronic likeness of the 16th president and Illinois native, Abraham Lincoln. And for the Pepsi-Cola Pavilion, Walt developed a somewhat last-minute attraction, a tribute to UNICEF called It's a Small World. It was an audio animatronic boat ride featuring hundreds of audio animatronic children from multiple nations singing the iconic anthem, It's a Small World After All. Guests would be drawn to the latter pavilion by a 120-foot-tall kinetic sculpture designed by Imagineer Rolly Crump called the Tower of the Four Winds. All four of these attractions made incredible use of the brand new and Disney-developed technology of audio animatronics. These attractions were a rousing success and even inspired several rumors that Disney might purchase the land housing the World's Fair and install an East Coast Disneyland right there in Flushing Meadows. That didn't quite happen. However, all four of these attractions would make their way back to the West Coast in the subsequent years, where they would find long-term residence in Disneyland. Disneyland was as popular as ever, seeing regular attendance of nearly 6 million visitors, and things were good. But Walt was determined to never be finished. After all, Disneyland was to be ever-changing, ever-growing, always bringing people back and inspiring even more to venture in and see what the hubbub was all about. At this time, Mark Davis, former animator and still relatively new Imagineer, shared a somewhat similar feeling to that of the mother and child in front of Jungle Cruise. While Mark Davis loved Disney and loved Disneyland, he felt there were surely some aspects that were growing stale and needed a little refreshment. After Mark's concepts were implemented into the popular enlivenment of the Rainbow Caverns Mine Train into the Mine Train through Nature's Wonderland, Walt tasked him with another railroad project. Walt wanted Mark to conceive a series of small scenes along the tracks of the Disneyland Railroad, the first stop for many guests entering the Disneyland gates. These would serve as little previews of what would be featured in each of the specific lands or even specific attractions around the park. They would be a vivid reminder and a deliberate invitation to come and explore the delight held inside. These vignettes would be creative and clever, and most importantly, they would feature a true Mark Davis staple. They would be funny. Mark Davis had an understanding of humor in a way that not many did. As an animator, he was able to capture comedy with minimal motion on the page, a concept that would be principal with the audio animatronics and small vignettes he'd be designing to occupy this true life space. Mark developed a plethora of concepts and gags to showcase on the railroad, one in particular being a trap safari, featuring 4 frightened explorers climbing up the height of a post, narrowly evading an angry rhinoceros waiting for them on the ground. Among the many concepts Mark Davis showed him, this one tickled Walt especially, and he felt it was good enough for the attraction itself, and an overhaul of the Jungle Cruise was underway. The Jungle Cruise attraction had already seen the addition of an elephant bathing pool in 1962. This added a series of playful elephants frolicking amidst the rivers and falls in full view of the boating passersby. Under the musings of Mark Davis, this 1964 update of the Jungle Cruise would see the addition of 2 new scenes: the aforementioned Trap Safari scene, and the African Belt, which featured a variety of jungle wildlife watching a pride of lions guarding their striped prey. Or was it just sleeping? With the changes in scenery, so came changes with the entire demeanor of the attraction. The on-ride narration was reworked completely to shy away from the stoic and serious nature documentary-esque tour through perilous jungle vistas that it was previous. The new Jungle Cruise received a Davis touch, embracing the nonsensical events that were on display, becoming a fun and lighthearted romp down the river, poking fun at the things that made it so majestic. The particular beauty of the script was its ability to incorporate ad-libbing. The replacement of the serious Jungle Cruise captain with a lighthearted Jungle Cruise skipper ensured that each cruise that every guest boarded would have considerable differences. The jokes could be presented with vibrance and vigor, but they could land just the same with indifferent or deadpan delivery. The role of the Jungle Cruise skipper became one of the most enviable roles for a Disneyland cast member to have. This is the plussing factor that Walt wanted. This would be what brought guests back again and again. While the ride took place on the river, the humor was dry, and comedy became the staple of the attraction. And with the addition of these scenes, the Jungle Cruise increased from 7 to 9 minutes. And there was a considerable protest. As theme park fandom began and started drawing lines, some factions truly despised the new tone, crying rivers, claiming it ruined the aesthetic that the original had left. However, it floated the boat of the majority, who were eating it up, enjoying the jokes and the diversity that each new excursion offered. Disneyland, now more than ever, was just a fun place to be, and guests would rapidly be flowing into the waters of Adventureland, and the overall adoration of the new and enthused Jungle Cruise would soon be mainstream. Like a river. 'Cause it's a boat. It's a boat ride. And that, my Explorer friends, was 1964. Make sure you like this video and that you're subbed to the channel, because all of those World's Fair attractions are coming to Disneyland, and there are stories to tell. Don't forget, we're on social media, and we're bringing you adventures from both coasts now, so stick around and explore, and until next time, we'll see you in the happy place. Bye!